The show is going your way. I had the worst question of all time, and you had one of the best. So I commend you for that.
This is the One Accord Podcast, and we are back again with another episode in our Biblical Theology project. This time, we're diving into the book of Joshua. Hopefully, going to tackle the first 6 chapters, which is very ambitious for us and the pace that we usually do. So we'll see, but I think we can do it because I have confidence in these guys. Let's go ahead and bring in our first team member, Brother Eric. Eric, how are you? I imagine you're excited that we're done with the Pentateuch and getting into Joshua. Excited as ever, I hope.
I am, although I will miss Moses a bit. I think, now that he's no longer in the picture, it's going to be different. But where there's a new leader, there's new enthusiasm and new excitement. So I'm looking forward to see what Joshua has in store for us. I think it'll be a great episode.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to talking about these things with you. But before we get to that, let's bring in Brother Greg. Greg, how you doing today?
Doing great. Yeah, sun's shining, and yeah, I'm good.
Looks like you got a fresh fade on your. Did you get a haircut recently?
Yeah, Friday. I think I got a haircut. Yeah, it's
been a while. You're making me jealous. I want to stop the episode right now.
You are always like fresh cut, and so I think this is about as long as you get.
No, I feel like a hippie right now. I got to go get a haircut for sure. But anyway, I'm going to try not to be distracted by like, man, Greg's got it tight on the sides. I got to go get a haircut right now. I'm going to do my best to try and stay focused.
I appreciate that. Please keep it serious, Joe.
Well, let's bring in our last team member, last but not least, certainly Brother Micah. How's it going with you?
I'm doing well. It was a blessed day yesterday. We had just a surprisingly packed house in the Sunday morning service, and so lots of people there to hear God's word, and which is not, if you're familiar with the local church that I'm at, we're not a large congregation, so to have our auditorium packed out like that was a unique thing for us. So
was there something in particular, or just the Holy Spirit moving?
No, we had 3 families visit randomly at the same time. So I don't know, it was a good day.
I think a lot of places have had uncharacteristically cold weather, but it was a little bit nicer this weekend. Do you think that had anything to do with it?
I think that our church is a little bit unique in that if one of our members or regular attenders is not going to be there, I don't make anyone do this. They literally reach out to me and tell me that they're not going to be there. I usually expect most of at least our membership and also our regular attenders to be there. I think it was just the 3 visiting families. Our auditorium's not that big, so it gets shoulder to shoulder pretty quickly.
All right. Well, I'm going to start from this point forward texting you every Sunday just to let you know that I'm not going to be there. Not because... just to let you know. Hey, Mike, I'm just not going to make it this Sunday. But and I'll let Greg and Eric make those decisions for themselves if they want to also start texting you. But anyway, well, why don't we go ahead and dive into our material? We are going to be moving into Joshua chapters 1 through 6. We're not going to read all of those chapters on the show, but we've all read those in preparation for our conversation. So if you happen to be watching this and maybe you haven't read Joshua in a while, we'd encourage you to press pause and read through those chapters just so that you are familiar with the content that's there. You'll get more out of our conversation that way. But we're going to talk about the things that kind of stand out to us, the questions that we have or that we want to raise to one another, things that just we want to mark as we continue on this biblical theology project. And so I think Eric wanted to get us started with our first question or observation from Joshua chapter 1.
Yeah, I will. I was reading verse 8, and God instructs Joshua to meditate on the law day and night, so that he would be careful to obey it, and that makes perfect sense. But the first part of the verse, it says, "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth." So I'm wondering what you guys think that means. What does it mean what does it mean that the law should not depart from Joshua's mouth, and how does that connect, or what does that have to do with meditation?
It could definitely have personal application to meditation, but is it possible that it has more to do with his leadership of the people? I know that the focus is on him in these verses, but if you go up to verse 5, "No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them." So there's the handing off of the baton and Joshua stepping into the role of this sort of singular leader of God's people. Now, obviously, Moses was a prophet. He's a prophet unlike any other Old Testament prophet. So he's certainly different than Joshua. It's not said that, God spoke to Joshua face to face, mouth to mouth, like he did with Moses. But in terms of his position among the people, it seems that Joshua occupies a very similar place to Moses because of the transition there. So it could be that it has more to do with the words of his law being in his mouth has more to do with his leadership of the people than it does some personal meditative application or something like that.
Like reciting it to himself or something.
Yeah, that's just me spitballing, though. I mean, it's not explicit about it, but
yeah, I have no problem with any of that. I guess for me, as I look at that pairing, that duality of meditating, dwelling, thinking about these things, and then the other side of the coin where it's your responsibility to speak them. You're to be declaring them. And while, yes, I think this was in particular something for Joshua, I think we can even take this back to Deuteronomy 6, right? This seems to be as I read so far, and as I know what's coming, I see a general responsibility for everyone who follows the Lord to be meditating on the Word of God and to have it continuously on our lips, declaring it, proclaiming it, professing it, confessing it. And so while this is in particular to Joshua and the role that he plays, I think this is generally true and should be applicable in some way to everyone who follows the Lord.
Don't you guys like how Greg agrees by saying, yeah, I don't have any problem with that? Like,
well, that wasn't, I truly did not mean that. Like, yes, yay and amen to that. And I'm just going to add on.
It wasn't the worst answer I've ever heard in my life.
Well, it probably was the worst answer. Well, I mean, if Joe had said it'd be the worst answer, but
that wasn't horrible.
That wasn't horrible.
What?
Yeah, I've said from time to time, instead of saying I agree, I say I don't disagree with that. And you're like, oh, okay, well, you could have just said you agreed. Yeah, Greg's so used to disagreeing with you. That's the problem.
Like I don't know. I think it's part of my, raised by an Englishman. There's just, I don't disagree, and then say something like, I don't mean that. I agree. Let me also add this.
I'm going to say something, but it's not because I disagree with you. I'm just saying something else. So I'll add my comments. I don't disagree with you guys either. So, but I think that the idea of quality leadership from this biblical standard, we obviously saw it with Moses. Now we're going to see it on with Joshua. It's setting the standard now that if you're going to be a good leader of God's people, you have to know what God's intention or what his revealed will is. And so relating to the idea of meditation, I'll just expand a little bit. A lot of people hear the word meditation and it's influenced by like the Eastern ideas of meditation. Some of you guys know, I was a kind of a lukewarm Buddhist for a couple of years. And so I practiced some meditation there. A lot of the times when you're trying to meditate in like an Eastern type of way, like Hindus or Buddhists or even just modern Zen ideas, you're trying to empty your mind of all thought. And this is the exact opposite of that. And so, I know some Christians become uncomfortable with the term meditation because of its potential mingling with Eastern ideas, but this is really the exact opposite of an Eastern type of meditation. The object of thought that Joshua is being commanded here to be thinking about a lot is the revelation of God. And so he's not called to be emptying his mind, but to be filling his mind with these things. And then I think that will very much result in what Micah was talking about, that as he ponders these things, as he thinks about these things, as he thinks about God's character and how God is commanding them to act, then that will very much influence the way that he leads these people that he's being called to lead in God's name, basically.
I think there's a couple of New Testament passages that might show us something about the what it means to be filling your mind.
Would you care to tell us about those?
No, I'm just foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I agree with what you guys had said. It's certainly possible and reasonable to assume that Joshua is supposed to meditate on the word and then teach it to other people. Greg, you had mentioned Deuteronomy 6. That was exactly where I was going with it. I think that if you're meditating on the word, naturally,
I foreknew that.
You're going to be, yeah. I know you did. That's why I mentioned it. So, anyway, derailed there. But if you're meditating on the word, then you're naturally going to be talking about it a lot. And in Joshua's position, being the leader now, he's going to have to be talking about these things. He's going to have to be teaching the people. But even in regular conversation, if outside the teaching context, if you're meditating on the word, if it's in your mind, if it's in your heart, is going to come out of your mouth. And I think that's the way it naturally goes. That's the way it's meant to be. And notice this is somewhat different from what we said earlier, but the part about meditating, he says you need to meditate on it so that you can obey it. And what that says to me is that it's not enough to just casually read this, a little bit here, a little, just to kind of put in your time, punch the time clock. Yeah, I put in 5 minutes here. I read a little bit there. This is supposed to be like consuming your mind. It's supposed to be like taking over your thoughts. And when it does, then you're very likely to obey it at that point, because it's becoming a part of you. So I think that's an important thing to point out.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to move us on. Here in this first chapter, we see again, like I've lost count a little bit. Joshua has been told to be strong and courageous. Now this might be the third or fourth time we see it repeated here. And this is one of the popular verses from Joshua. My guess is if you were to walk up to the random Christian and give me 2 verses from Joshua, this would be one of them, maybe one at the end of the book. But it's my impression that people most often see this strong and courageous as an external application, but you're going into land, be strong and courageous regarding these people. Any thoughts on the internal strength and courage that's needed? Not necessarily because he's going to face the enemy and drive them out of the land. The Lord's really going to do all that, but an internal strength and courage as he's leading this people. And any thoughts on pastoral applications or application as men and women listen to this who need to lead their home and lead their families and lead their lives in a strong and courageous way?
It's interesting that be strong and courageous. It's said 2 times in verses 6 and 7. One time it has to do with going into the land and taking it. The next time it has to do with obedience to God, obedience to God's law. So verse 6, be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. That appears to be focusing on their conquest. But verse 7, be strong and very courageous, being careful to do all the law that Moses, my servant, commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have good success wherever you go. So 2, be strong and courageous. 2 times be strong and courageous. 1 to do with the inheriting of the land, the other to do with obedience to God's law. The question is, what does courage have to do with obedience? Especially when it's not in this like sort of battle context. Like, what does courage have to do with obedience to God's law in your day-to-day life? And I think that there's something that's inherently cowardly about all sin. Because cowardice at its heart is self-serving. Cowardice at its heart is not being willing to do what is necessary for what is ultimately good outside of yourself, even if it comes down to self-detriment or self-sacrifice. Obedience to God's law, it inherently takes a certain amount of courage, because it involves dying to yourself. It involves rejecting the cowardly attitudes that so easily grip us, and living for something that's higher than you, namely the God who made you and the God who redeemed you, if you're a Christian. And that's going to leak into everything, especially into your home life. I think about this a lot with guys who are dads or becoming dads or becoming husbands or whatever. The amount of times per day that you are going to need to die to yourself, and the unwillingness on behalf of so many to die to themselves and to obey God when they don't feel like it. It is cowardly. It's inherently cowardly and effeminate because it's self-serving and it's weak. So I think that the courage has a lot to do with obedience to God, even on a day-to-day basis.
I completely agree. There's your positive. I completely agree. But I would also want to add that, and we're going to see this, we've already seen it, and we'll continue to see it all throughout the Bible. The proclivity of fallen man to be afraid of or to value the opinion of others, other men, the fear of man, the need for courage, I think, is inherently and almost primarily about don't do what everyone else wants. Stand up against the rising tide of popular opinion. Be courageous. Do what God has said, rather than be overly consumed or overly impressed with what other people may think about you.
Yeah, The idea of leadership is that you are to lead. And I know that it almost sounds just absurdly simple when you say it, but a lot of leadership devolves into pandering or just being a figurehead, where you're basically the leader is being led by the people that they're supposed to be leading, because they're just trying to enact whatever it is that the will of the crowd is, or the loudest voices in the crowd or whatever. And so that's not leadership, and it takes strength and courage to actually lead. Look at what we just saw. I mean, this is on the heels of Moses dying. Joshua's now taking the mantle. Joshua, of course, was always in the wings. He was in the shadows, but he saw Moses trying to do what God said, and the people were awful to lead, to the fact that Moses sometimes was like, God, just kill me. Like, what? I don't want to do this anymore. So if Joshua's now the one who's got to do it, he's going, and the fact that his mentor and the one that he saw before him, maybe the one who was doing it better than anybody else possibly could have, says, well, that guy wanted to die to escape this responsibility, because the people often don't want to do what God is telling them to do. And I'm the one who stands in between, trying to enact God's will and plan, because God has said these are the things that we need to do, and I need to lead us in this direction. And everything in the people is going to be trying to take us in different directions all the time. So yeah, I mean, that certainly has application to our individual lives, certainly to our home lives. It also has, Greg, you asked in your original question for people in pastoral leadership. I think of, guys get fresh out of seminary, maybe they go and they get their first job in some church that's existed sometimes longer than they've been alive. And that place is going to, it's going to have an awful lot of ideas about where it wants to go. Are you going to be strong and courageous to lead where God wants to go? What if it doesn't go the direction that the people want to go? Are you willing to stand strong, or will you compromise? Will you become a man pleaser rather than a God pleaser? So I think it's very applicable. Those are the thoughts that I would add just to the conversation.
Do you guys think that there's a deficiency in how we think about servant leadership specifically?
Well, sure. I mean, I think leadership is ultimately a service position, serving people. If everything you said is correct, and I haven't thought about it in those terms, but you weren't saying anything that was like sounding really wrong. But if every act of disobedience is ultimately an act of cowardice, then if the leader won't stand firm and will enable people to walk in their self-serving cowardice, you're not serving them, you're harming them.
Yeah.
And so an act of service isn't always doing what people want you to do, but it is doing what is best for them. And so you can serve people. Husbands can serve their wives and serve their children by leading them appropriately. I think a lot of times people think that service, we think of servants like, well, there's a master who's the leader and the servant is the one who serves. Well, you can be a servant leader. And so I think some people hit it, but yeah, there's definitely a detriment. It seems like those concepts are antithetical, but they're not. They're complementary.
I completely agree with that. My only problem, and I don't like where the whole idea of servant leadership has been co-opted and taken in recent years. And so I generally want to avoid that term just because it's not a biblical term. So it's not a term that I feel like I have to hold on to. It's a biblical concept, biblical principle, but not a biblical term. And so as I see it going in effeminate directions, to use a word that you use, and I completely agree with, yes, a good servant leader, that is firmly biblical. What the effeminate, weak, pandering, led around by a hook in the nose servant leader that we see nowadays, I have absolutely no use for.
Well, because like a lot of the time you hear criticisms of people now using that term, right? Yeah. This person rules with an iron fist. He's not a servant leader. And I'm sure that's true of some guys.
There are tyrants in churches all over the place, not denying that.
But like when that accusation is leveled, when you get underneath it, much of the time it's this person
isn't doing what I want
in a direction that I disagree with. Yeah. And like, so there's a difference, okay, between the leader taking his people to what is good versus what makes them feel good. And so some people, like Greg said, it's been co-opted to mean weakness and effeminacy. Basically, I'm going to be led around by everybody's desires, and I'm basically a distillation of all of the passions of the crowd. That's what this this servant leadership thing has become. No, That's not the biblical picture at all. That's not what Jesus does for his people. This is going to be a demerit, but it's not what Jesus does for his people. He doesn't give the people what they want by nature. He takes them to what is good for them. So it's a good biblical concept, but it has to be understood rightly, and it's been perverted.
Yeah, for sure. Service, if you're not just called servant leaders, are not just servants, that you have to take this hybrid term together. And there are elements of service that you shouldn't, that should temper against the other extreme of being a tyrant, which we all know that exists. But not all strong leadership is being a tyrant, and it can be service. And if we're going to go to the best potential example of it, since you've already taken the demerit for it, I'm not going to, they killed Jesus not because he was just so good at being everybody's butler. Like you don't murder your butler who serves you perfectly. Like they murdered him because he was a servant. Yes, he came to serve. Yes, but he was trying to lead in a way that a wicked and self-serving generation didn't want to go, and they hated him for it. And so servant leaders need to understand that, yes, there's service to the people. Joshua needs to understand right here, you are serving these people. You are leading these people. As you serve them by leading them in the direction that God has called you to go, sometimes they will hate you for it. So be strong and stand firm. And that doesn't mean that you have to abuse the people or that you have to, go into some excess. But you're never serving people by acquiescing to the childish or to the foolish or to the sinful or to these other things. That's not a good thing to do, but it will be, people might praise you for it. But yeah, Mike, as you're talking about that, it always reminds me of when two people disagree and one person starts calling the other person closed-minded. It's like, wait, so we both disagree with each other, but I'm the closed-minded one because I don't agree with you. So what does that make you? Because you don't agree with me. Open-minded? I guess help me understand this. So
part of my reason for wanting to push back against servant leadership is because you see this emerging from time to time, even in the secular. Even sound, proven, battle-tested leaders recognize that leadership is what we'd call servant leadership. And so instead of trying to co-opt and rehab servant leadership, I would rather just talk about what is healthy, proper leadership. Because I think healthy, proper leadership is all the good things that we'd want to call servant leadership. So let's get rid of the qualifier and just call it leadership, and let's recover what it looks like, at least from the Bible, to lead as a godly man is called to lead. And I think you're going to hit every one of those servant leader check boxes and probably more.
I'm going to get even a little bit more punchy. I think it's specifically feminism that has basically used this servant leadership thing as a jab to destroy strong men. I think that's what it is.
It's a tale as old as time. It started in the garden with the curse there, and so if we want to slap the modern label of feminism on there, great, I'm fine with that. But it's built into the curse. Yeah,
as it attacks the modern church, though, I think the main manifestation of it, like the way servant leadership is being used to criticize, it's primarily criticizing and tearing down strong men who have a vision of where God wants God's people to go.
Yeah. And my only pushback is should feminism collapse tomorrow? Yay and amen to that. But I don't think this problem, that manifestation, that those particular symptoms might go away if feminism collapse, but that problem is still going to be there because it's built into the curse.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not sure I can get fully on board with that. You might be fully right. I think at least in the manifestations I've seen of it, and that it hasn't at least emerged to my understanding as a movement primarily fueled by feminism, but more just a reaction to not just strong men, but to tyrannical men, like people who do wield their power to serve their own agendas. And so
there is
certainly
that too.
There is. I mean, we discussed, are you going to lead in God's direction, or are you going to, pander to the will of the people? Well, what about someone who just emerges that wants to lead in their own direction? They're not pandering to the people, and they're also not following the Lord. They're just a tyrant. They're a spiritual dictator. These are very dangerous individuals, and they ought to be removed. They ought to be resisted. And I would think that oftentimes it does take, in fact, not a feminist push, but actually a push from strong men to stand up to these other strong men who have somehow acquired these positions of leadership and are now leading in an ungodly direction. And so I see a lot of that as well. And so it might be a push from feminism. I'm not discounting that, but there is another category of a genuine tyrant, which we've all acknowledged that it takes a strong man to stand up against these false types of leadership, and that is.
Yeah,
that would be similar to what
strong yet compassionate, strong yet gentle, in the ways that Jesus, I'll jump on this demerit since it's Micah's, in the ways that Jesus was both compassionate and gentle, yet, strong.
So a bigger problem that, if I'm going to ask myself, what do I think is a bigger problem in our day? Not just with pastors, because if you're a pastor, it assumes that you've probably already demonstrated qualities where people are willing to put you see you in a particular leadership light. I'm thinking of more just even on the level.
Sometimes you're just a guy who's willing to be pushed in a direction, and people put you there because they view you as a puppet. My goodness, some pastors are weak sauce. I'm telling you.
But I'm thinking of like in a more broad way, like husbands and fathers. I've seen in my personal, and I don't have endless experience. I'm sitting here with three people that probably have more experience with this than I do. I've seen more weakness and effeminacy from husbands and fathers than I have seen tyrants in the home. Now, I'm sure that you guys all have your own unique set of experiences too, but I've seen far more men who are passive, unwilling to disagree with their wives, frankly.
In the church, I think I'm not speaking too disproportionately. I've seen just about an equal number of tyrants to effeminate passive. Though, if I were to do a count, I'd probably see more effeminate passive, but whatever, right? So they're both a problem, and so is one bigger than the other? It's only a bigger problem in the context that you're in. If you're in a church where you have effeminate men being led around, what is Lewis's statement? Old church women of both genders. If quote Lewis, don't persecute me for that one. If that's where you're in, that's a real problem, and we need to acknowledge that. If you're suffering under some narcissistic tyrant who, a savage wolf who's risen up among you, there's my demerit, then guess what? That's your biggest problem. And so I wouldn't, in the final analysis, I wouldn't want to try to make one more or less prevalent, because somebody could be listening to this is like, I don't have the problem. I wish we had strong men here doing things. Well, until they get too strong, ditch on both sides of the road. So.
Yeah. Just briefly about Joshua specifically, God told Joshua to be courageous because Joshua was doing something that God commanded him to do. Joshua was told, go in the land, take control of the land, be a leader to the people. And Joshua could find courage in the fact that he knew that was God's will, and God was going to back him on that. So it's one thing to just be courageous for courageous sake, but if you're a believer and you know that you're doing the will of God, you can be courageous in that because God told you to do it, and He's got your back, and He's supporting you in that endeavor. So I just looking at it in a more broad way.
Good thoughts.
All right, so let's move on to Joshua chapter 2. And my question is, in verses 9 through 11, Rahab explained that all the inhabitants of the land heard about Israel's Red Sea crossing and their defeat, of Sihon and Og, kings of the Amorites. And because of that, all were terribly afraid. Not just those in Jericho, but it sounds like the Canaanites in general were pretty fearful of the coming of the Israelites. Everybody knew what happened in Egypt. News spread, and people heard about this. And she even said that they knew the Lord had given Israel their land. They knew that. So what are your thoughts on Rahab's words? Because this is coming from a Canaanite. What do you think about her words? What are the implications that you see here? Does this harken back to anything that was that we read about earlier about the conquest of Canaan? What do you guys think about that?
I'll just give a couple of brief thoughts, but I think that a lot of objections that I hear from people about religion in general, especially about what is revealed in the Bible, is they think that God is so, focused on a very narrow group of people, and that he's a monster and a tyrant because, he's going to command these people to be eradicated from the land, and they have no, if this is all true, God's just a genocidal maniac who wants to kill all these people and never wanted them to be saved and all this other kind of stuff. I think that Rahab's statement is profound in the fact that it is telling us God has been working in history and demonstrating that he is in fact God. And Rahab is testifying, we know it. And so the people, if, she ends up pleading to be joined to this people, and she was allowed. And so it seems that if there was some similar response of repentance or something like that, that God would have been much more merciful. She seemed to find some mercy in these chapters that we're reading. And so I think it is profound for anybody who thinks, well, God was so isolated and he just wants to kill and destroy, and look at how much of a monster he's just destroying all these, people. God was acting in history to make sure that people knew, and they knew. And we'll see, I think, other examples of this, but this is a profound statement. Before 24/7 news cycles and everything else, people knew. They knew what God was doing. They knew of his mighty works. They knew that only God could do this. And that gave a great opportunity for them to potentially repent and believe. But many of them persisted and tried to fight against God anyway. And so that's my main observation, I think. And that is more profound than, at least in my mind, than a lot of people would give it credit for.
I agree with you. I mean, how interesting, because I think the natural temptation, let's say that, some foreign country wanted to come and invade and take over the United States, and their invasion plan was wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years. Like, listen, you guys are clowns. Like,
good luck.
Good luck. What are you doing? Right. And so the fact that at the end of 40 years, these people show up, and the Canaanites are like, we know that this is what God, we're going to work against it. We're not supporting this, but we know that this is what your God is doing, is impressive. Because the natural temptation would go like, your God has you wandering around. He doesn't know where you're going. You don't know where you're going. So the fact that is her perspective, and potentially, or at least knowledge possessed by the others, is a testimony to the greatness of God and making known to everyone in the land what he was going to do.
I'll take it a step further. Wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years, or, hey, you're going to go conquer this city by walking around it a whole bunch of times and shouting.
What are you talking about? Have we read that chapter? Have we read that chapter?
Yeah, it's the last chapter here.
Okay. All right.
So, I mean, the way that God had them do this, and the way that God conquered Egypt was the dominating power of that day. I mean, it would have been public news. What we see in Rahab is a response to revelation. It's these things weren't done in a corner. Everybody knew about it.
Remember earlier in Exodus 9, verse 16, he says, "But indeed, for this reason I have allowed you to remain, in order to show you my power, and in order to proclaim my name throughout all the earth." God wanted to be known throughout the earth. And when he brought the Israelites out of Egypt, the whole earth, at least the Mediterranean earth, the Mediterranean world, they all heard about this. They all knew the mighty power of Yahweh, and they were scared to death. Actually, it says specifically their hearts melted within them. So God, he wanted to be made known, and he did. He made himself known through all these miracles. So, and also, I we talked about before, Joe, you mentioned some people think God's this genocidal maniac or whatever. If they knew that God was this powerful, they probably could have left their land. And actually, we had read, there's countless verses where God says, my intention is to drive them out of the land. Now, drive them out implies get them to run away. That's one of the ways it can happen. There are other ways it can happen too. But the point is, they had enough knowledge to know if we face Israel, we are in a whole world of trouble. I mean, God just overthrew the Egyptian army like it was nothing. If we stand against him, we're taking a huge risk. We're taking our lives in our own hands. And so I think this was very merciful to God, because these other nations could go, you know what? We're not going to be able to beat this God. He's too powerful. Rahab knew that, and she did the smart thing, and she thought, okay, well, I'm just going to join them then. If you can't beat them, join them. Well, that's what she did. And so all these thoughts are coming into my mind as I'm as I'm reading this text.
Well, okay, so let's talk about Rahab. We discussed the Egyptian midwives and maybe the moral dilemma that we saw there, and Rahab's another example of these great moral dilemmas in the Bible. Rahab lied. It's a clear and obvious lie. And so, thoughts on this? Is this a justifiable lie? Is this a good lie? Was Rahab, or was it preordained from eternity past that Rahab was going to lie this way, and so it's excusable or justifiable or good? Thoughts on Rahab and her preordained from eternity past lie?
I'm not sure what the preordination of anything has to do with this, but other than to throw a punch at me.
Bait.
If we're just speaking about the moral quality of her action, I think that it was moral good. And you have to understand what God forbids in his law is a certain type of bearing false witness. He's not forbidding righteous deception. All warfare, assuming we could assume that there's a possibility of a just war. All warfare is based on the concept of righteous deception. Or to put it in maybe a different illustration, if somebody had kidnapped my child and I knew the house that my kid was being held at, if I pretend to be the electrician, go and knock on their door, say, "Hey, I'm the electrician. I'm here to work on your outlets," or something like that. And he lets me in, and I go get my kid and run away with her. Are we really going to say that's a moral evil? No, we're not. We all understand that this is you have to understand the Bible with these kind of categories, because you see all sorts of actions, just like Rahab, that are not condemned as moral evils. They are portrayed as faithfulness to the one true God. So I think you have to have a category of righteousness.
I totally understand that position. I understand just war, whether it's right or not isn't the point. But if that is our grounds, that maybe we could say it's a lie for the greater good. How do we know when to draw that line? Like that, there becomes a murky zone. I don't know how wide the murky gray zone becomes, but by definition, I think if you say some false testimonies are for good and therefore they are not a moral bad, you have to create a gray zone. How do you know where that gray zone's at?
I don't think it's a gray zone. I think the question is whether your intentions are in accordance with God's moral law. So is your intention,
but not bearing false witness is part of the moral law?
Just a second. Once again, I said it's a specific kind of lying that's in view there. Is your intention to glorify God and to do your neighbor good, or is your intention? Now there are more things you have to consider here, but this is the baseline. Is your intention to serve yourself? Rahab certainly wanted to save her household, but she also understood something was being revealed about the one true God in what he did to bring his people up out of the land of Egypt. She was delivering her own life. She was also delivering the life of those closest to her, whom God had given to her. She was thinking about the good of her people, and she was thinking about the glory of God, it seems. So I think that those are the kinds of things that you have to think about if you're going to weigh righteous deception. Just like if you're going to weigh just war. There are all sorts of variables, but there are some really basic ones that have to be considered first. I'm not, just to be clear, not saying that's the only variable, because people can do the ends justify the means thing all the time. But so there are more variables. That's the most basic one.
Yeah, and I think your acknowledgement of multiple variables might be the gray zone that I'm talking about. If my conscience says one thing and your conscience says another, telling a quote unquote righteous lie might lead us to both make the same decision. Maybe I have to righteously take this man's life, and you go, no murder is acceptable, or no killing is acceptable. So I think your acknowledgement of the multiple variables is the gray zone, whether you want to call it the gray zone or not.
I would frame it this way. So if what Rahab did was a sin, I think it was the lesser of two evils, if it was a sin at all, because her choices were, one, lie to protect men doing the will of God, or two, tell the truth to help her own people who were under the judgment of God. If this was a lie, if it was a lie that was not justified, which I personally have a hard time believing, but then again, I'm just going by personal feelings there. It seems like she did the lesser of the two evils, if it was evil at all. She knew that her people were under the judgment of God, or she knew that God had given them their land, and so if she said, "Well, I'm going to tell the truth to help these people who are under the wrath of God," I'm not entirely sure that would have. I mean, I guess you could always say, well, if you tell the truth, God will just simply work it out, or He will make it turn out good, for you, or maybe He won't, but you still did the right thing even in that situation if you told the truth. But I tend to think that what she did was the right choice, and I'm trying to steer away from passages that we'll get to later on in Scripture, but for now, just based on what we have to work with, I personally think that she did the right thing by making that choice.
I'm going to go ahead and disagree with both you guys. I do not. I think, Micah, you said that this was a moral good. I do not agree with that. I think she made the right choice, but she did it in the wrong way. So I disagree with what you were just saying there, Eric. I think that just like when we talked about with the midwives, I think that the Bible is filled with figures, people who are flawed and who do things that are understandable, maybe justifiable in their own sight. But no, where in Scripture so far, and we keep our eyes open for it as we keep on going, are we ever told that doing the right thing is guaranteed to work out for you? Sometimes there are consequences. Sometimes you stand up for justice and you end up perishing in the process. She could have made the right choice of saying, listen, I'm not going with my people anymore. I'm going with the Israelites. And she could have just made that stand very faithfully. And if she had done that, I wonder how it would have read. That's very similar to the conversation we had with the midwives. Yes, they demonstrated some sort of faith and courage in standing up against the decree of Pharaoh to kill all the Hebrew boys. But what did they potentially miss out on by seeing God deliver them in some amazing way, potentially? Or maybe they would have died. But would their stand have been any? Would we read that and go, you know what? They stood up and they said, you know what, Pharaoh, we defied your unrighteous decree. We will not murder these boys for you. And if he killed them, would we read back and go, oh, what a bunch of fools? I think we would go, wow, what amazing women of God that they took a bold stand. In some ways, again, getting back to that potential murky territory, Greg, I agree with you on that. Is this not bearing false witness against her neighbor? She literally lied to her neighbors, which is going to lead to all of her neighbors dying except for her and her household. Her false testimony directly contributes to the death of everybody in this city, pretty much. And
this is where my joke about foreordination actually lands. I know Joe well enough to know that this was the answer Joe was going to give. And so the fact that, at least in Joe's paradigm, there are potential other paths. They could have done this differently, and it still would have worked out well for the children of Israel. Maybe it wouldn't have worked out as well for Rahab. We don't know. But there are other ways that this could have gone in which Rahab would not have had to have violated the commandment not to bear false testimony. And because I think those are potentials and not, or again, the joke about foreordination from eternity past, take it or leave it. But at least in that paradigm, it could have gone different, which may have been better, may have been worse, but God had declared the people are entering the land, and the people would have still entered the land.
I don't want to be in a position where I think that, I need to help God out by doing things that he says aren't right. When we saw Abraham lying to try and help God out, God was perfectly capable of taking care of his people and keeping his promise without Abraham lying about his situation. And then God had to do other things like, protect Sarah by sending a dream to Abimelech. Why couldn't he have just done that in the first place? Of course he could have. And so when I start to justify in my own mind, this is a morally acceptable lie, this is in fact a morally good lie, I'm putting myself in a very tenuous situation where I think I don't know that I can trust myself, because I talk to people all the time who say, how many lies do you think you told? Oh, I told a lot, but they're always good lies. Well, according to whose perspective? If I talk to the person who you lied to, would they think it was good? So from God's perspective, I think God cares about telling the truth. And sometimes, like, let's say I tell the truth and I get killed. Okay, I'm protecting somebody that the government's trying to kill, and I'm some hero, like the people were doing, hiding Jews from the Nazis to try and protect them, or hiding slaves from people to protect them, or something like that, right? We've seen these types of categories. And you say, they knock on your door and you're like, do you have slaves here? And you go, yeah, I do. And they kill you. Okay, well, from a very earthly perspective, we go, that was a dumb decision. But I want to live my life in a way that I'm honoring God. And if God wants to deliver me, he can. And if he doesn't, I don't want to trade some sort of, like, it went a little bit more comfortably for me in this life for some, eternal reward of standing faithful. And I think that we'll see other examples of that, of people who did a better job of saying, I'm making the right choice, but I'm going to do it closer to the right way. But the Bible's filled with flawed characters. I'm a flawed character. I'm not standing in judgment of Rahab. I definitely think she was doing the right thing in the sense that she was going with the right group. But I don't think that means that everything she did in the process of making that decision was the right thing, any more than I agree that Abraham and Sarah producing Isaac as the right thing did everything right along that way. I mean, they still have an Ishmael to deal with, right? There was things that didn't go right along the way, and I don't need to put a rubber stamp of everything in this narrative is correct because maybe the outcome worked out the way that is best or something. In fact, if I'm reading this, I wonder, are the Israelites doing something wrong? They've been told to drive these people out and to not really spare anybody, and then they immediately make this deal. So we're looking at it from Rahab's perspective, but I wonder if we're just reading this going, are they doing something wrong from the immediate get-go, that they were told to be strong and courageous, and then they immediately make a deal with somebody to take them with them and not seemingly do exactly what God told them to do. There's a lot of tension going on in this text, and I don't know that I don't think that we're supposed to say that everything Rahab did was right, even if she did a lot right, if that makes sense.
So my question about whatever illustration you're going to use, because there are several illustrations that could come from this, whether it's hiding the Jews underneath your floorboards, hiding slaves in the Underground Railroad, or hiding the Israelites when the Canaanites come looking for them. But you're not just putting your own life in your hands. They're not just killing you; they're killing all the Jews that are in your floorboards. Like if you say, "Yeah, I got the Jews," like they're killing all of them too. So I guess we have to ask ourselves, what do we think the purpose of this narrative is? I just don't see what she's doing as being presented in a negative light. I see it as an act. I see it as a result of her faith, which we're going to see later on, perhaps.
Yeah, but
I see it as a result of her faith, not a result of self-serving intentions.
The motivating factor here is her faith in what she already has professed, that God's doing this thing, and he's going to do this thing. That, to Joe's point, I don't think that that's a rubber stamp approval of everything, every individual action she makes. Micah, as far as I know, you're a faithful guy. Does that mean that everything you do in pursuit of being a faithful guy is always the right thing? I don't think so. And so should we call every decision you make a moral good because you are generally, and maybe even specifically in particular instances, a faithful guy? No, I don't think we have to blend those categories. I don't think we have to do that.
The difference is I don't think my sins are a fruit of faith. I think they're often a fruit of faithlessness. And I see her actions here as a fruit of her faith.
And I think what Joe is saying, when I'm arguing the same thing, so what I'm saying is, if she had been faithful in another way, or maybe more faithful, she would have just went like, yeah, they're here, they were here, they're not here, yes, I did this, right? That, like, here, take another, in a very Pauline way, man, come what may, this is what is. And so she could have been just as, maybe even more faithful had she not resorted to what has been revealed as a moral negative, providing false testimony. Maybe there was room for her to be more faithful whilst...
We have no idea how this story would have unfolded if she was honest. God didn't need help. And so it's very possible that she could have just said, they came and I'm not telling you anything. And they're like, well, if you don't tell us something, we'll arrest you. She goes, okay, arrest me. And they throw her in jail. And then the Israelites come in and they free her from the jail. And it ends up in the same exact thing, that she ends up with them, but she just didn't lie about it. So I can't justify the lie. I'm not trying to change your mind. You can view that. I just don't think I can't say that it was morally right. I don't think her lie was right. I don't think Abraham's lies were right. I don't think that the midwife's lies were right. Anybody else who's going to lie, I think that you're trying to avoid earthly consequences for standing for what is right. Did she ultimately do the right thing in choosing to go with the people of Israel rather than with her own people? Yes. Did she do it in the right way? I don't think so. But again, I've heard a lot of different arguments about this, and I think every single person you talk to, they'll do it. It's the old philosophy department to get it out of is it, if you steal bread to feed your starving family, is it wrong? And should we prosecute poor people for doing crimes? Because crime is really just a product of poverty rather than whatever. Crime is crime. It is wrong to lie, I think. I think the Bible is as clear as possible on that. And so I just get really uncomfortable. And again, you make your own decisions. You're a smart guy. I'm not trying to change your mind. I definitely disagree that I would say that this was a morally right thing to do. I think it demonstrates at best a tiny view of faith, but if she had more faith, she would know that this God that was able to deliver them from Egypt could certainly deliver her from the hands of her own people if he wanted to. And if he didn't, isn't that part of what we understand is our faith walk? Like walking with the Lord, it doesn't always work out the way that we want it to. Like sometimes standing for the Lord, why do we need to be strong and courageous? If everything always works out for the best, according to the way we view it, then it's just, you don't need to be strong. It's just a path of least resistance. Sometimes it's really, really hard to be faithful to the Lord. Lying to avoid or mitigate consequences, I don't think is morally permissible from the scriptures.
So just to be, and we could all come up with examples that are incredibly difficult circumstances that would push us to the limits, right?
Understandable. But not necessarily morally.
So, like
righteous.
your kid, the house that your kid has been kidnapped and being held at. Let's say law enforcement won't do anything about it. Mm-hmm. You're not pretending to be the electrician.
Well, here's where I fall, Mike.
I didn't say that I'm some morally perfect guy that I've never done anything wrong. Could I understand?
I want
to go full Liam Neeson on people. For sure.
You're not.
I was going to say the same thing.
Righteous.
Listen.
But I'm not a perfect man, Micah.
I'm sure. I'll tell you this. I'm sure I would lie. Is it right that I would? No, I'm not going to justify my sin. Am I going to do it?
I can say
absolutely.
I've done lots of stuff.
I don't think it's sin.
And then I'll drag the guy out and I'll shoot him in the back of the head, and I will sleep well at night. I've told Joe, if your family came under persecution, you won't lie for him. Send your family here. I'll lie for him. Do I think I'm right? Well, I think I'm right. Do I think I'm righteous? No, I don't think I'm righteous, but I'm willing to. I know me.
See, Greg, you can't admit that on camera, because now if that ever happens, I'll just be like, I'm not telling you, and they'll kill me. But then everybody knows that they got to go to your house next.
It's fine. Come and get them. I got guns. I got lots of guns.
Yeah. No, it's yeah.
This isn't about what I would do or wouldn't do.
No,
it's about it's how I read the text, and I think the text, based upon the revealed text and based upon what it says she did, is she faithful? Yes. Did she do it as morally pure? Is she morally pure in every action she took? No, and I don't have to defend that.
So the question you have to ask are these narratives, whether it's this or the Hebrew midwives, are they intended to tell us that there is a deeper level of nuance under that command about bearing false witness?
I don't think so.
I don't see any reason to read that. Look what God here. Look at all these. Look at this horrible situation. Look at these flawed people. Look at the Israelites were flawed, maybe to the extreme, like constant. Continue to see. But look what God did anyway. God announced that He was going to do this, and regardless of the stupid, poor decisions, the unrighteous decisions, God's still doing it. I think when you take on the perspective that, this is here to show me that there are reasons that make breaking God's law excusable. I think when you take those on, I think it's a false hermeneutic, and again, that's what leads to huge gray areas because it has to.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, Greg. And I think, with Micah, with all due respect, it sounds to me, you can explain to me why you're not doing this, but it sounds to me like you're violating your own principle of saying that, narrative sections that describe what happened are not intended to be weighted more heavily than explicitly didactic sections, which are telling us what ought to happen. And so we have didactic sections telling us what ought to happen. Now we have a narrative here that we're reading of telling us just what happened, which is, of course, understandable to us because we're all human beings and we can all relate to what's going on. But if God has told us what we ought to do, we certainly can't read the narratives telling us just what people did as saying, well, this is what we ought to do. No, we ought to do what God said rather than what just comes naturally to us or what makes sense to us, I think.
I still have to decide. I still have to make a decision, though, a hermeneutical decision about what I think the moral point is here from this narrative, and allow that. And
this isn't a fable.
Even you guys said, because even you guys said they mutually influence each other to some extent, and I didn't disagree with that. Disagree with that. I think they bear mutual influence on each other as well. I think it could. I just think that it's. There's a point to be extracted here. How are we supposed to see her actions? I don't know that I'm coming away with if I'm just reading this, I don't know if I'm coming away with the message that she did something wrong here.
From a hermeneutical standpoint, I don't know that you would agree with this, but there's at least sometimes it's good to pull back the methodological thing. These are not Aesop's fables, made up stories with a moral point. These are historical narratives telling us about what actual people actually did. And so I don't know that there is a moral point that is needing to be made other than this is a record of how God brought his people into this land. And so I don't think that I am supposed to be, we're thinking maybe as preachers and teachers now, and we're treating this historical narrative as if we need to draw some sort of moral point. If we do have to draw a moral point, respectfully, I would say, well, we should draw our moral point from the didactic section saying we know that lying is wrong. And so even though what she did is understandable and justifiable, even though God worked through these actions of a sinful, flawed person, God is still righteous. So I do not view, and maybe you do, I'd be shocked if you did, but I do not think that we need to, read narratives that tell us about flawed human beings making questionable choices and draw some sort of moral conclusion. These weren't written for pastors and preachers to sermonize. These are historical documents telling us about what real people did, and this shouldn't be a newsflash to anybody. Sometimes flawed people do flawed things. There can be truth mingled with error. There can be goodness mingled with rottenness. That can all be the case. And so I respectfully disagree that we're trying to draw some sort of moral principle. Like I might need to do that if I'm preaching this on Sunday, or I think that I need to do that because that's what the people expect. But even if I do, I still don't think that I need to say that this is a morally right thing from where I'm sitting. But again, we don't need to, I won't say any more about it. We don't need to, I don't need to keep taking us around. I'm repeating myself at this point.
Yeah, I'm not trying to moralize or treat it like it's like Aesop's fable or something. What I am trying to do is recognize that the things that were written previously were written for our instruction. That's another demerit. And so that instruction is multidimensional. It is certainly telling us something about the faithfulness of God and bringing his people into here, but it's also narrating the actions of these individual characters in a certain way for a certain reason. I'm simply trying to understand what that reason is, and I just don't come away with this was a negative action from her.
I agree that things were written for our instruction, but I'm going to respectfully suggest you're drawing the wrong conclusion from this based upon the details.
Okay.
So, all right. Brother Eric, are you awake, sir?
I'm hanging on by a thread.
Sorry.
To make my point firmly, I would have to go beyond, where we're at now. I'm not sure that it's something where if I say it, you guys are just going to go, oh, yeah, okay, I'll agree.
It's only one way to find out.
Only one way to find out. But we're not finding out today.
Today is not that day.
Today is not that day. But as I read Exodus 20, the verse about the command about not bearing false witness against your neighbor or something, I'm not sure exactly how it's worded. I don't remember exactly how it's worded. I don't have it in front of me. But I thought that the context of that command was not exactly what's going on here in Joshua. So I'm not entirely convinced that they're perfect parallels. So I guess I don't know. I'm up in the air on this. I'm not entirely. I'm hearing both sides. Now, without getting a demerit, to say that that there's no moral lesson here with Rahab. Well, in the New Testament, she's mentioned. Now, I'm
to be specific, I didn't say that there was no moral lesson. I just said I didn't think the moral lesson was that the lie was morally good.
Okay, well that's fair. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, if that was the main takeaway, then when this story is repeated, that part is never repeated. Now, maybe you could very easily say, well, it's not repeated, but I mean, we know if we compare this with the Ten Commandments that this is a violation of the law. I mean, that could be. I tend to think, and I want to be careful with this because I don't want people to think that I'm saying go ahead and lie, and if you think it helps you out or it benefits you, then go ahead and lie. I'm not at all saying that, but I think that I'm not convinced that lying in every single situation is always wrong. But then again, I can also see I would get a demerit if I brought up the passage. But there are reasons to think that it might be in every single situation. So I want to be cautious with how I say this. Again, I would have to bring in other verses that would go beyond where we're at. So I'll hold my tongue as much as I want to bring up other things.
So whether I agree or not, when we say if we were to take the position that lying in every circumstance isn't wrong, that is by definition creating a gray area. And I can tell you that a lot of horrible, bloody-handed things have been done in the name of for the greater good. And history doesn't remember those well, and I'm not convinced that God is going to remember those well when our response is, well, I did it for a greater good.
But the history does remember the hiding of the Jews well. I just want to point that out. I'm
not making a commentary on every situation.
And Rahab. So once again, Eric was dancing around it because he didn't want to get the demerit. I've already gotten a slew of them. Hebrews 11 says that she welcomed the spies. Now you could say, well, that's just about her welcoming them, not protecting them by her lie. I kind of think most of it's collapsed under that positive statement about her in Hebrews 11. So
that's an interesting twist.
She's not spoken of negatively.
Yeah. It's an interesting. Yeah. Again, was Rahab faithful? I'm not saying she wasn't. Let's just put. I'm willing to leave it here. If you're going to hold this position, it does a very interesting thing to your hermeneutic, and I plan to use that against you in the future.
I'll let it rest. I'm all done.
Well, after the plotting of the people's demise, we can move on.
Just Micah's.
Okay.
One person's demise.
One person's demise, so it's fine.
It's only because I like you so much.
Well, maybe we can move into chapter 3 if you guys are ready for that. I had a question about verse 5. So the verse 5 says it's a command to consecrate yourselves. And this is, of course, in preparation for, taking the land. So what do you guys think this purification means? What does this involve? What do you guys think? All right.
I think we're all still in the previous conversation.
Yeah. It was a hard transition there.
I think it's similar to my mind immediately went to when they're told to wash their clothes before they experience the presence of God at Sinai. It seems to me when there's some massive revelatory event where God is going to make himself known to and with his people, they're told to take some special action to demonstrate the holiness of the one that they're going to come into contact with.
So you see this as a ceremonial type of purification. Yeah, that's okay. That's the way that I saw it too.
But it should be accompanied with the appropriate measure of introspection,
of course,
of sin, things like that. Yeah,
the two are always supposed to go together, even if the latter is not stated. Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm in full agreement with Micah.
So That is now the lamest question of the show so far.
Maybe even our whole series. Who knows?
maybe even the entire series.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad
Don't
you
sell it
asked that.
short, Eric. Don't sell it short.
Wow. Well, we all fall short at times. I've really fell short there. How about we move on to? Is that the only question for chapter 3?
It was.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Well, at least I tried.
We spent an inordinate amount of time on the last one, so
That's true.
I was surprised when Eric didn't ask a question about the Rahab thing. So I felt like we shouldn't have passed it by.
I left it for you, Greg, because I already knew you were going to bring it up. So
You foreknew it? Yeah.
I did.
Well done.
I did.
I foreknew that Micah wasn't going to ask a single question.
Okay, well, now that we know each other so well, let's see if we can predict what each other's going to say with this next question. The Lord commanded Israel to make a memorial using stones from the Jordan after they crossed on dry ground, and this would act as a sign for future generations. Joshua 4:6 says. So, what does this reveal about the nature of the event? And I hope, Greg, you know where I'm going with this. But how would you categorize this event? If you had to
memorable.
Okay.
I don't think there's any extracting Greg from the weird mood that he's in right now.
It was evident before we even got started this morning that Greg was in.
I tried the first half an hour. I really did try, fellas. So. Well, I really don't know what you're going for,
Eric. Why don't you clear up the mystery for us?
I'll just enlighten you, Greg.
Thank you.
I'm happy to do it. So, the point that I was trying to make with this question is this is a literal historical event. They're setting up these stones to say this really happened. This isn't mythology. We're not, this isn't some kind of object lesson. It's not only that. This is to remind us that God really did this for us. He really brought us across the Jordan on dry ground. This really did happen. And this is a sign so we can remember this literal historical event. And there are other things, and I take this with a grain of salt. I've heard there are other archaeological discoveries. For the sake of the format of the show, I can't go, beyond what we're talking about now. But there are other memorials that archaeologists have found that show that they really did set up these memorials, and therefore these events really did take place. So I found that to be even more interesting. It adds something to the text when this isn't just something that superstitious people did, and then there's no reason to believe it literally happened. I mean, we found some of these memorials, maybe not this particular one, but other memorials have been found. Dug up or discovered somewhere by archaeologists. I just thought that was fascinating.
I agree, that. And I was only half joking when I said, "What is the nature of this?" Rememberable. I think memorials like this are a good thing. I wish we wouldn't be tearing down statues and memorials in our country today. I think being able to depending on what they're for, right? I think having a concrete visual reminder of certain truths, whether historical or theological, I think is a good and helpful thing. We have things hanging on our wall that are there primarily because I need a reminder of those things, and it's good for me to have a reminder of those things. Two of you guys have been in my office. I have quotes on the wall. Do they look pretty? I don't know, I suppose, but they're there because I need to look up every once in a while and remind myself of particular truths. And so I think that's a good thing that perhaps we should recapture, at least personally, if not corporately as a society.
It's a reminder that there's a transcendent God who has done concrete acts in human history, the mighty acts of God. And there are so many forms of spirituality that deny, like, even if someone's not an atheistic materialist, there are so many forms of spirituality that really and fundamentally deny that is a possibility. I've been reading a lot of Herman Bavinck in his Doctrine of God, and he constantly talks about this transcendent God who reveals himself in history through his mighty acts. And he contrasts it with things like pantheism, into which you could collapse like almost every new age form of spirituality that we see cropping up in our day. What makes all those, like, one of the things that ties all those things together is that they don't have a transcendent God who acts in human history. What they have is some sort of universal consciousness or something. And if the Bible is suitable for any spiritual purpose, it's simply to make these sort of moralistic points by which they can get in sync with the grain of the universal consciousness, or become more enlightened, or something like that. Protestant liberalism actually started with that kind of pantheizing tendency. The first Protestant liberals were not atheists; they were pantheists. They didn't believe these things literally happened. They moralized it instead. They said, no, these are stories meant to get you in tune with something, basically. But it's just interesting that biblical religion is so distinct because there is a transcendent God. He acts in human history for his glory and for the good of his people.
All right.
Okay. My question for this chapter, is there any surprise from you guys that the people crossed over on the 10th day of the first month? Shouldn't they? Is there something else that perhaps they could have or should have or otherwise would have been doing? Thoughts on that?
Greg, I gotta admit to you, I actually thought this was an excellent question.
Oh, well,
I wanted to give.
So I got a good question, excellent question. You've got the worst question.
This show is going your way. I had the worst question of all time, and you had one of the best. So I commend you for that. Yeah, well, and if people have been paying attention to our previous episodes, or at least studying their Bibles, they would know that 40 years earlier, on the day, on the 10th day of the first month, Israel was commanded to take a lamb for themselves and keep it in their house until the 14th day of the month, during which time they were supposed to slaughter it, and Passover was supposed to take place. But this taking of the lamb was supposed to happen on the 10th day of the first month. And so I thought that was interesting, and I kind of wonder, I wonder how that was. I mean, I guess some people still could have done that. I'm not really sure how to think about it, but I thought it was a good question, and it really got me thinking. So I don't really have a great answer for why it was done on this day and how it was practiced or whatever. So hopefully you guys can enlighten me.
I don't have anything enlightening about this particular point. Greg, do you have something enlightening for us?
No, I just thought it was interesting. Again, the 10th day of the first month is integral to the idea of the Passover, and here the people are passing over the Jordan. And so, is this a greater Passover? Is it? I feel like this is one of those details that if you're a more casual reader, and that's not a pejorative, if you're a more casual reader of the Bible and the dates and the months kind of tend to blend and you gloss over, this is an interesting point that they passed over when they should be celebrating the Passover.
Do you think that there were some laws that Israel was keeping in the wilderness, but then there were other laws that they were not keeping? One of the reasons because they simply couldn't, about leaving the edges of your fields, for the alien, and obviously they weren't able to grow anything in the wilderness. So do you think that that the Passover was something that was mostly supposed to happen, after they entered the land? Like, do you think God gave them some grace before that? Or
I think I'm remembering this correctly. They had maybe we're going to see it in chapter 5. The people hadn't been observing circumcision up to this point, and so circumcision restarted in chapter 5, and so it's very possible. I don't know. Joe, thoughts?
Yeah, you said a phrase that I don't think I'd get on board with. Is this potentially a greater Passover? I don't think that, but I'd probably go more along the lines of I'm not sure how much they were really doing in the wilderness. It seems like as they got into the land, they were definitely expected to do all these things. But I mean, God is explicitly commanding them to do this stuff now. So I suppose his explicit commands could supersede some of these other things, but the timing is interesting. And maybe they would have thought, as the men are going to war, maybe the lamb could have been brought into the house. Maybe they are expecting to actually celebrate the Passover, and maybe this conquest will go very quickly. It could be interesting to think of, if you were approaching a walled city or a fortified city and you're coming from the wilderness, you might be expecting some prolonged siege, and maybe this timing is showing that they could actually, as God is commanding this timing, that it's going to go so quickly that they'll still actually be able to, potentially. I'm not sure that the text will tell us that they celebrate the Passover, but I mean, it is an excellent question. I'm just speculating and throwing things out there. I don't have a I don't have a definitive answer to this question.
I wouldn't argue for a greater. I was asking the question, trying to generate
Sure.
discussion.
I would just plant my flag. No, I don't think this is that. If I can give a definitive answer, that's the only one.
Thematically
it's a
connected. I think thematically connected, typologically connected. I don't know that I would go that far, but I don't think this happened. I don't think this accidentally happened on the 10th day of the first month.
Fair enough.
All right, Joshua chapter 5. According to verses 10 through 12, when Israel began eating the produce of the land of Canaan, it says the manna ceased on that day. So God had been miraculously providing for them in the wilderness, and then right when they had access to the produce of Canaan, the miraculous provisions of God stopped. Is there anything that we can learn about miracles in general from this passage? Is this giving us like a timeless principle, or is there? Are we able to learn anything and apply anything today from this, or what do you guys think about that? Maybe I hope my question isn't too vague.
I would start by saying that I'm not convinced that the miraculous provision ended. Water of the Jordan being separated and the people walking through and now having this. It's a different miracle. I'm not convinced that it's without miraculous nature.
Yeah. I think that this shows that God is able to provide for his people what they need, and he is willing to adjust his means in order to do so. And that's what I think, one of the reasons why we are best suited to just take him at his word and do what he says, even if it doesn't make sense to us, because it didn't make sense that they could have survived in the wilderness for as long as they did. It makes much more sense for them to be able to provide, to survive based on what's being produced from the land of Canaan. But we see that both of these things were working according to God's plan. And so, when people think that God, well, I have to do this because, I need to help God out. They didn't need to help God out. He provided them everything that they needed. And then there was a clear transition point. And when they didn't need the manna anymore, then the manna was all done. So, I think that as a principle, I think that we can trust God, that if he tells us to do something, we can do exactly what he says, and he'll provide what we need. Obviously, the manna wasn't what they wanted. They complained an awful lot about it. I'm sure that some of them were delighted that they were going to get a little bit more variety from the produce of the land that they were coming into. So sometimes God's provision is more abundant than others, but that's kind of what I would draw from it. I think we can trust God to give us what we need to obey him, and we don't need to help him out. He can do it. What I should focus on is not grumbling and complaining about the provision that he provides.
I think that there might be a general point that you can draw saying the kind of miracles that are on display tend to respond to particular circumstances. So the miracles don't stop when they come to the land of Canaan, they change. The dividing of the waters of the Jordan, certainly also the falling of the walls of Jericho, like all sorts of miraculous provisions of God there. But they respond to the particular needs and the particular circumstances of God's people in order for God to demonstrate his might toward them. I think that you could even maybe, if you're going to bring it into today's world, I know there are all sorts of parts of the world where people are coming to Christ because they are spoken to by the Lord in dreams and things of that nature, and they're spoken to persistently. It seems to be claimed by too many people for it to be a fabrication, at least some of it. So like you could ask, well, I know all sorts of people in our context that really, really wish they could just hear from the Lord, But they live in
Open
a
your mouth.
context with, yeah. So like they live in a context where you can open God's word and read for yourself. They live in a context where the preaching of God's word, there's easy and open access to it. These are often closed nations where the people are not hearing the gospel. They're if there is a church there, it's highly persecuted and under great threat. That's where these miracles tend to manifest. So perhaps there's a principle here that says the miracles respond to particular circumstances and often to the plight of God's people in those circumstances.
That's kind of the direction I was going with it. Is I think maybe the reason why God doesn't do miracles sometimes is because they're just simply not necessary. It's that the situation doesn't call for it. Now, God can do a miracle whenever He wants. It doesn't matter what the circumstance is. God can provide food. He can heal people. Actually, if you remember in the law, there were certain statements God made where He said, "If you obey me, I will keep away the diseases that are in Egypt. You guys won't be affected by those diseases at all. I'm going to keep all those things away from you." So there is ongoing miraculous provision for Israel. But I think, though, that the circumstances did change, and therefore the manna just simply wasn't necessary at this point. So just a simple observation, nothing really profound, but I just thought it was interesting. I have another question. In verses 13 through 15, Joshua meets, it says, the captain of the Lord's host. And the angel, and I think it's an angel here, tells Joshua to remove his sandals because he's standing on holy ground. And you guys already know that God told Moses the same thing when He spoke to him from the burning bush in Exodus 3:5. And just as Moses led the Israelites through the Red Sea on dry ground, Joshua led Israel across the Jordan River on dry ground. So what do you think of these similarities? Is there a reason why God is repeating these things to Joshua? What are you guys' thoughts? Man, another bad one, huh?
No, it's not a bad one at all. I guess I'm not sure what to make of the repeating. Again, it's hard for me to not want to jump to some systematical conclusions based upon some of the crumbs that were given. I guess I'll avoid doing that today. So yeah, I'm not convinced that do I see similarities here? Yes. Moses brought people through the Red Sea. Joshua brought people through the Jordan. Moses stood on holy ground in front of the bush. Joshua was standing on holy ground as he was there in front of the captain of the Lord's hosts. Is there some underlying thing? I have no idea. Maybe we could argue that Joshua is walking in the likeness of Moses, but we've covered that, and so that's not necessarily new revelation. This is just an example of that, perhaps. So my best answer is I'm not sure if there's something more that we're supposed to be getting based upon the similarities.
Well, let me just offer a verse and see if this takes off anywhere. But in Joshua 3, verse 7, it says, "Now the Lord said to Joshua, 'This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you.'" This might not mean anything beyond what it's saying, but it could be that God was, interacting with Joshua and miraculously intervening for Joshua in a similar way that He did with Moses, to show, hey, I did this for Moses. I was with Moses. This is my proof that I'm with Joshua now, and you can trust him because I'm supporting him just as you trusted Moses. So that was just,
would
was my thought.
Would that bump up against? I mean, the question is, are you for us or are you for our adversaries? The answer is no. So He's not saying that I'm here for you, Joshua. He's here for the Lord explicitly, and it seems to me that Joshua is being faced with the question of, well, am I going to be for the Lord, and am I going to be for this captain of the host of the army? So I think that that's a pretty big difference, or at least it would give some potential pushback to the explanation you were just giving, although the parallels are certainly profound. God, did a very significant thing to reveal himself or reveal, his purpose in the life of Moses, and now something potentially similar is happening. But it seems like God already did all that. I mean, he had Moses make it clear that Joshua was the next leader. So I don't know that this would be necessary at this point. And that detail always stands out to me when Joshua specifically asked this figure, "Are you for us or are you for our adversaries?" He doesn't say, "Yeah, I'm here for you because the Lord sent me to help give you deliverance." He says, "No, I'm the captain of the Lord's army. Like, I'm not here for you or for them. I'm here for the Lord." And that seems to put the ball back in Joshua's court. Who are you for? So, I mean, that seems like that would potentially push back on what you were just saying, or does it not? Is what I'm saying completely different than what you were just advocating for?
I'm talking about exalting Joshua in the sight of the people, not in the sight of God. I think in Joshua 5, that situation is more so focused on are you going to follow God? But I'm talking more so about for the sake of the Israelites knowing, like the Israelites, by crossing the Jordan, that was evidence. Oh my goodness, God is with us. God is with Joshua. Joshua is our leader. So from the Israelites' perspective, I think that gave them confidence that God was with Joshua. And but I'm not really talking about from God's perspective here. I'm more so talking about from the perspective of the Israelites.
Well, that's what I'm saying in Joshua 5. Then when Joshua says, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" wouldn't an answer of, "Yes, I'm here for you because I'm with you and the Lord is with you," wouldn't that make more sense based on what you were saying?
Well,
if your view is correct, it would have been more clear had the record been something like, "And all the people saw it and stood awestruck and amazed." And I feel like we've already, and I'm just trying to find it here in the text real quick. I feel like we've already seen the promise in chapter 3, and then it said, and Joshua was exalted in their sight. This is days later after the circumcision, and so I'm not convinced that is the purpose for this individual showing up here. And so if I had to plant my flag somewhere, it would probably be a little bit closer to Joe's position.
So I think that the parallels between Moses and Joshua here are important, but I don't know that the point is succession. I think the point is, I think it's the same theological point, but with progression in where they are in their journey. So God reveals himself to Moses in this very similar way. Take your shoes off, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. But he reveals himself to Moses in the burning bush. This fire that doesn't consume the bush, it's self-existent, doesn't depend upon the bush. He's revealing himself, and he reveals his name to Moses in that circumstance as well. He's Yahweh. He's the one who is. He just is. He's not dependent upon anyone or anything else to be what he is. And then in this context, the angel of the Lord appears to Joshua, but this time it's not in the burning bush. He's standing with a drawn sword in his hand. It's still, and I think, take your shoes off your feet. The place where you're standing is holy. Same theological message, but there's a progression in where they're at in their journey of God delivering them and revealing himself to them. Now he's revealing himself as the one who fights for ultimately he serves the glory of God, but he's going to go conquer Jericho. Like, it's going to be him. And then the fall of Jericho happens in the way that it happens, in this utterly miraculous way that could not be attributed to any human effort. I think that's probably the main. To me, it seems like that's the main point here.
Well, just one thought, and I get what you're saying. The statement about, I'm not for you or your enemies. As I read that, I guess what I thought was, well, if he's not for Israel, but he's for God, but God has just told the Israelites to go into the land and conquer the land, and he says, "I will be with you, and I will, be strong and courageous. I'm going to be with you." Well, I mean, that's kind of, wouldn't that be saying, I'm for you. Now, of course, Israel vacillated back and forth constantly in their faithfulness to God. I mean, they were faithful for 10 minutes here, and then for several years they weren't, and then they turned back to him for a moment, and then they fell away again. But I think that I think maybe what he's saying is, Joshua, if you are going to follow God, if Israel's going to follow God here, I'm going to support you. If you don't follow God, I'm going to turn against you. But I think I think that the context is talking about it's implying they are going to go to the land, and they are going to at least hopefully obey God. And if they do, then God will fight against their enemies.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think that, Greg, I think the verse you were looking for was Joshua 4:14. So God, obviously, Eric, as you're bringing up, was saying that he was going to exalt Joshua in their sight. He did that after they came through the Jordan and set up the memorial stones, and he was exalted in their sight. But even so, God isn't for Joshua. God is for God. And so if Joshua is going to be walking those purposes, then yeah, this captain of the Lord's armies is going to fight, but he's going to fight on behalf of the Lord. And so, yeah, if they vacillate and if they turn against the Lord, then this captain isn't with them or with their adversaries. He remains with the Lord. And that's an interesting caveat to keep, right? Moses, when he made a mistake, I mean, the Lord was clearly for Moses as Moses was leading the people, but as soon as Moses sinned against God, he wasn't allowed to come into the land. And so I think that people can get, mistaken individualistically. We can certainly get, confused as nations. Well, Israel's God's chosen nation, so God is for Israel. Well, God is for Israel when Israel is for God. But what happens when Israel isn't for God? Is God still for Israel? Do we have to then, put the rubber stamp and say that God is, going to support every God? And he's like, oh, they're doing idols now. I'm for that. Of course not. And of course we all understand that. So that's what to use this as a signal that this angel was a declaration that God is for Joshua. It just seems like that's explicitly denied when he says, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he explicitly says no.
Well, I get what you're saying, but take for example Exodus chapter 3, where God is commissioning Moses, and then in Exodus 4, God is going to kill Moses because he didn't circumcise his son. I think that there's an idea where. And I guess I was kind of assuming that went without saying that yes, if Joshua was obedient, then the angel would fight for him. If he was disobedient and he turned away from God, well, I mean, he's already said in the covenant, if you turn away from me, I'll turn away from you. He said that in Deuteronomy 31. So I think I just kind of assumed that went without saying. But
I'm dull sometimes, so you have to say it. You have to say it out loud. So I can hear
that's not what I was trying to say. But
I'm saying it.
Okay.
As the only characters in the narrative at this point in the story being this captain of the host of the Lord and Joshua, I tend to think this is more about God reassuring Joshua of everything that you guys have just said, more than it's about elevating Joshua in the sight of the people, who again aren't even on the stage.
Right, but they all knew this happened. I mean,
I'm not saying they didn't.
It's
know
written
this
down
happened.
in the book, so I mean, this wasn't a secret meeting. I mean,
I wasn't suggesting a secret meeting. Well, let's put it this way: what it appears Joshua took, if Joshua wrote the book of Joshua, it appears that he was less concerned with the reaction of the people than the interaction between the two of them.
Yeah, no, and let me make this clear. I am not saying that Israel was standing around going, "Oh, look at, this is our proof now that that God is with us," because the angel, came to Joshua. My point was just simply that there's it's a pattern again, and I'm not trying to put more in than what's there, but it just seems like, because it's a repetition, and even the language is either similar or identical between Joshua 5 and Exodus 3. It just seems like there's an intentional parallel here. Not that everything is identical. You guys have already brought up some differences. We know there's some differences. We know these things are not exactly the same. I don't know. It just struck me, and I could be
the similarities.
Maybe I'm off.
The similarities, funny enough, have Moses by himself in the burning bush, not anybody else, or not in the desert with the burning bush. not everybody else gathered around watching Moses at the burning bush. So,
right, yeah, exactly, yeah, true, yep. So again, just food for thought. I'm not going to write a doctoral dissertation on it.
I think you should try.
I'd read it if you did, Eric. So go ahead.
It's not incredibly important to me, but I just thought I appreciate you guys' perspective, though.
Well, why don't we finish off our conversation? We'll finish with our last chapter in Joshua chapter 6. There was a question that I already kind of alluded to. Maybe you guys have additional thoughts, but from the Israelites' perspective, as we're reading the interaction with Rahab, is this a violation of what we read in Deuteronomy chapter 7, particularly verses 1 through 6? They weren't supposed to make a covenant with the people, but now in Joshua 6, we're seeing that Rahab and her family were spared and seemed to live with the Israelites for the rest of the days. So is that a tension that we should be paying attention to? Again, getting back, we don't need to revisit all the, was this good or not, but we were talking primarily from her perspective. What about from the Israelites' perspective? Should they have made this covenant? What are your thoughts on this as we kind of conclude our conversation today?
Seems to me she fell into the category of one of those who became who was integrated into the nation. So this wouldn't be the nation making a covenant with the people to live side by side or, hand in hand. This falls in the category of an individual or individuals joining Israel and taking on that identity. And so I think that's where some of the nuance needs to play a factor in our understanding.
I don't know that. I agree with Greg. I don't know that what is being outlawed in Deuteronomy 7 is repentance and integration into the people. It appears that it's like, as Greg said, what's being outlawed there is any effort to sidestep the need to totally wipe out these nations as they exist currently. Like if the city of Jericho said, we'll make a covenant with you and you let us exist and we'll pay tribute to you, but we're going to keep doing our thing. That seems to be more of what is being outlawed in Deuteronomy 7, not extending mercy to people who are truly repentant and seeking to become part of the Israelite nation. But that's just my inkling about it.
Yeah, I kind of thought I thought pretty much the same thing you guys did. I think the commands in Deuteronomy 7 apply to the nations within Canaan, not necessarily individuals. So, for example, here Rahab is essentially acknowledging that that Yahweh is the one true God, or at least the most powerful God. I don't know if she thought that the God of her nation didn't exist, but she at the very least recognized Yahweh is all powerful, and we can't stand against him. And so it sounds like she converted. Essentially, she was in at least in the process of converting to Israel's religion, worshiping Israel's God. And so I don't see this as a violation, because I think Deuteronomy 7 applies to nations, not necessarily individuals. And the command in Deuteronomy 7, 3, and 4 about not taking wives among the Canaanites seems to be referring to women who remained pagan, not necessarily to proselytes. And so I think if it turns out that Rahab marries one of the Israelites, then I don't think that's a violation. Actually, Moses along the journey married a Cushite, but I think we talked about the fact that it's assumed that she converted to Israel's religion, to the worship of Yahweh. So I don't think that is forbidden in the law.
Well, friends, that is our show for today. That's what we think. What do you think? You can sound off in the comments below. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? Do you agree that Greg's question was an excellent one? Do you agree that Eric's question was the worst of all time? We'd love to hear your thoughts below. Feel free to sound off down there. And until we see you again, friends, get equipped, obey your King, and glorify your God.
Man, another bad one, huh?
Rememberable.
Wow. Well, at least I tried.